a lot of problems, and that, if you saw that segment, the BBC thing, that it explained why after a certain point everybody sort of said, oh, Aristotle, it's all wrong. It isn't actually, and the categorical system is actually still the way we work, if you think about it. But the idea was, well, we just describe everything as it is, put it in its appropriate category, and you're done. That's knowledge. That's all of it, right? That's the encyclopedia, essentially, right? You know, you have that. The assumption is we know everything. You know, if you want to know something, just find the right book, look up Y1K, you know, and you find it, right? And you know it. And so that was really what happened with Aristotle, was that once Aristotle was explained, he has to be rediscovered, in a sense. It was lost for a while. After Alexander died, the Greeks rebelled against Alexander and Aristotle, because he was attached, of course, to Alexander. And remember, Alexander was Macedonian, not, in a sense, Greek, per se. You know, that's still, by the way, it's still today, Macedonia and Greece don't like one another and argue. Like Macedonia just recently wanted to join NATO or the EU, I forget which, but in any case, the Greeks were against them joining as Macedonia because they didn't think they should be allowed to call themselves that. Yeah, it's just, you know, forever problem. In any case, Alexander was Macedonian. As a result, Aristotle's works, you know, were kind of, you know, superior to Plato, but at the same time kept basically in a basement of some sort by those who ended up with all of his writings. And it was only after really going through the Arabic translators, and then during the Middle Ages, during the Crusades, the Western Crusaders discovered these texts and basically reintroduced them back to Europe. The alternative route would have been up through the universities that were in Spain, which were not only Arabic but also Jewish, but even, you know, Christians could go to those universities in Spain. They were multicultural and really quite an open society compared to what would happen after El Cid reconquered Spain and it became Christian again, and everyone that wasn't Christian were tortured, killed, made to convert, still not believed because, well, they were converted, you know, and so there was a diaspora from Spain of all the people that, as we'll see. But, so Aristotle is reintroduced roughly around 1200 AD, and so when we're looking at the Christian point of view up until about that time, it is Platonic. Platonic philosophy, in a sense, is the one that wins, and of course it's embedded in our culture. We have so many Platonic ways of viewing things, even if it wasn't necessarily what Plato thought. It blossomed, it grew, and our ideas kept going. And we're still confused. I ask how many people have a soul. Most of you say you have a soul. That's a derivative, really, of the Platonic point of view. For Aristotle, nothing is invisible. You know, I mean, you know, physical things have to have substance. And so if there is such a thing as a soul for Aristotle, it has to be co-equal to the body somehow. And I think his answer, what the soul is absolutely magnificent. He says it's the activity of the body. Aha! Well, that's pretty close to what Plato meant by the soul anyway. But now you've got it co-located with the body, and so everything for Plato, or rather everything for Aristotle, has a soul, if it's life. It never says rocks have souls. like Yoda, but you have plant souls, basically. That is the soul of a plant. What is a plant's soul like? Well, it just sits there, sucking up nutrients and growing bit by bit, etc. That's what the soul of a plant is, or a soul of a paramecium. It's moving, it's deciding things. We don't understand how can it do that because it doesn't have a neurosystem, which takes multiple cells. It's just one-celled animal, but it makes choices and behaves, etc. So how the heck does that work, right? So it has a soul, although Aristotle wouldn't have been aware of anything microscopic, probably. Right? So for him, the soul is the activity of the body. So of course, what happens when you're dead?
Body circumstances activity for the most part.
For the most part, it's kind of neat. Gottfried Leibniz is one of the first ones that looks at a dead body with a microscope, and he discovers that there's more life there now than there was when the body was alive. Because of all the everybody is trying to, I want, this is mine, give me that. How death, how that works, especially before we have, embalming things, etc. By the way, I want to be buried at Fort Rich. That's
my cemetery.
Yeah, I've got my ticket. I know my wife and I have already gone for a walk around there. She wanted to see what it would look like. But that was a little uncomfortable. But she wanted to see, etc. So that's kind of interesting. Go on a date and walk around the cemetery to see where you're going to be buried. How it? Okay, so let's get to the metaphysics. So this is one of the most famous books. I understand that it's so boring that one day the tide went out and never came back. Sorry, it's not really an appropriate joke for a book, but you get the idea that this is technical writing. But the very first line in multiple translations, of course, is famous. All men by nature desire to know. Most people that I know of also would disagree with that and say, no, actually, there's quite a lot of people that prefer ignorance in a certain way. That's scary to even get into that kind of an argument with folks. But for Aristotle, when you're categorizing things, you have the category human. And what does Aristotle consider to be the main characteristic of being human? Our rational, our desire to know, our educational curiosity, right? So of all the animals that are out there, as far as Aristotle's concerned, we're the only one that's like that. Today we might identify ourselves by saying it's primarily the language and the kind of language that we speak that identifies us as different than other animals, because humans have recursion. Remember, in our language, and even dolphins and elephants and other animals that we think have languages, we know they have languages. But the question is, well, do they have the same kind of human characteristics in the way we do language? And argument is we have recursion, so it's the nature of our human language that makes us, a lot different than the other animals. So that's interesting, I suppose. But so one definition that he gave for humans was that we were featherless bipeds, because we walk 2 feet, and at least at a certain stage in our life, right? Man starts off on all fours and graduates to 2, and then eventually goes back to 4. So they say, or 3 for a while when you add the cane, is another one. But featherless, because even though we're bipeds, we don't have any feathers. The joke was that one day someone made fun of Aristotle and threw a plucked chicken in front of him. So there goes a featherless biped. Did that happen? I don't know. But we're also rational, and that's because of our interest in knowledge. Of course, that was his focus. So when you think back, these philosophers were clearly focused on their own way of interpreting the world and what was important. And so they're going to give you an explanation of what life is like based on their narrow bias, right? That's okay. We understand that today, no problem. But it's pretty clear that it's there. And in fact, he was, remember, a student of Plato. And along with Plato's idealism, you also have values. Those values were the Greek Athenian values at the time. Remember, they evolved drastically from the time of the Iliad and the Odyssey. They didn't worship individuals that were just big brutes that could kill anybody they wanted. Instead, they had the concept of justice. They were arguing over what is justice. And it would be a society, the ideal state, where you have this pyramid of job categories, by the way, that included all the workers. And the workers' value in that pyramid is, now that would be fun for me not to be able to remember what the value was, right? What's the word for it? When everybody wants pizza, right? And you've got pizza, but if one person hogs all the pizza, that's wrong. So you have to have self-control, right? What's the word for that? I've got all the answers right here. What are the 4 Greek virtues? Oops. Temperance. That's the word I want. Temperance. So, the working class. The people that like the rewards of physical things. The virtue for that class is temperance. You don't want too little of your share, but you're okay with your share. Don't take too much. So share evenly, because that's the best way for us to all get along. Let's think about Elon Musk and others. When the United States first became a constitutional republic, part of the original contracts essentially required that any company that formed would be reevaluated after a number of years, and if the property that they had continued to build for the company was good for the society, then they could continue to work and get their contracts continued. But if the society decided that they were actually taking more than their share and not being good for everyone, they could be essentially collapsed, made illegal. It'd be an interesting history of our economic system to see when these different kinds of changes would have taken place, so that you could end up with single individuals that own so much that how do you deal with it? What does that actually do? But so temperance was the virtue of the working class for Plato, and they discussed that in the Republic, and you can see how they come up with that as an answer. Remember, the Republic is a middle dialogue, so you don't have Socrates being the nasty asshole that doesn't have the right answers that you get in the early dialogues where it's probably really Socrates, but instead the middle dialogues are Plato trying to teach people this is what I think are the right answers. So he's using these dialectical arguments in order to promote those kinds of view, right? But so you get temperance. That's the virtue of the working class, people that want stuff. If you're in the militia, though, the spirited class, you're